Hello, year 13. So, in this year, you studied one of the two topics you've done in human geography after superpowers was health and human rights, which is a huge beast of a unit. It's got 4 inquiry questions, and in a bit like changing economic world at GCSE, it feels like there's a bit of some inquiry questions seem like a completely different unit to other inquiry questions. So I thought I'd go through the whole specification from Edexcel with you, inquiry question by inquiry question, highlight the case studies we've done in class, just to summarize some of the key things you need to know for your paper 2 exam that'll happen after half term. Okay, so the first thing to mention in health and human rights is the fact this topic 8 is one of the optional topics. So in doing health and human rights, we don't teach you about migration. Okay, but the first thing to understand is that traditional definitions of development are based on economic measures. Okay, so in inquiry question 1, we focus on measuring development, and often development is measured in terms of income, GDP, economic measures, and more actually we start to look at social and human factors. So because there's a big variation in norms and laws of different countries. There's some really high income countries that have very different laws to others. I'm thinking Saudi Arabia's, Qatar compared to the kind of France and Germany. So yeah, traditionally we used to look specifically at economic measures. Now we tend to look at a more holistic approach because there's big variations in norms and laws between countries around the world. And then there's the last section of the unit also looks at impacts of geopolitical interventions. Sometimes these norms and laws are so ignored or abused or not monitored that it requires geopolitical intervention. And geopolitical intervention can happen in different ways. It can happen militarily, it can happen financially, it can happen politically, etc. Okay, and we look at different types of intervention and their effects and the levels of success. Okay, because ultimately human rights, breach of human rights usually highlights a huge issue of inequality and injustice in a society. Okay, so that's kind of the 4 big themes of this unit are measuring development, the variations in levels of development, the impacts of intervention to address these variations, and how those interventions can or fail to fix inequalities and injustice. Okay, so inquiry question 1 is here, and it's basically looks at what is human development and why do levels vary from place to place. There's inquiry question over there. It's divided into 3 big chunks: chunk A, B, and C over here. Chunk A, it looks at the concepts of human development and their complexity and why it's contested. So you see here in the exam specification, they talk about human development. We look at it from a GDP point of view, economic, but we also have a lot more into social human factors like the World Happiness Index. And how there's also very different ways in which societies develop. And we had a look at Bolivia under Evo Morales socialism and the Sharia law in some countries of the Middle East. Okay, the concept of development in those 2 societies is going to be very different to the concept of development here in the UK. Okay, we also look at how we can improve the quality, environmental quality, health, life expectancy, etc. One of the key scholars in this field is Hans Rosling, the late Hans Rosling, who's this Swedish demographer, doctor, who's got some incredible books and videos. His book, it was Factfulness. I'd recommend you read it for this unit. And then the 3rd section of this first part is looks at education, how education works. You might remember there we look at the difference between education, between genders, between social classes. We look at the PISA index, which compares different countries' education system. Okay, so it's basically measuring development is the first one. Okay, and why it's complex, how it's not that simple. High income countries isn't necessarily high income everywhere. Second one is we look at the notion of health, in human health and life expectancy. Okay, so we specifically focus on health and life expectancy rather than just general development. And in this case here, we have we look at Aboriginal people in Australia, we looked at Indigenous people in Brazil, we looked at different types of gender, class, religion in the UK. So there are 3 big countries really. We look at life expectancy, access to medical care, access sanitation, etc. Whilst in the 3rd one, we have a look at the role of international government organizations, or IGOs, and how they can help to sustain improved targets of development and health and human rights in some ways. So we look at IGOs like the World Bank, IMF, the World Trade Organizations. The specification here is quite old-fashioned or outdated now. It talks about MDGs, Millennium Development Goal, which is what I learned about in school. Now we do the SDGs, which are the Sustainability Development Goals. And so the case studies you have to learn about, I kind of wanted to summarize them in whole, is the EU is one of the kind of big organizations that's moved away from simply relying on economic measures of development. They do a bit more of a holistic approach. When we look at international variations in health and health and life expectancy, we compared Zambia to the UK in our lesson. When we looked at national variations, we looked at within the UK, within Australia, within Brazil. When we looked at international intervention from IGOs, we looked at IMF, the World Bank, and how they tried to improve the level of development of some countries. The case study we focused on was the Greek bailout. That was based is the Troika. The EU was also added into that. It was a bit of a mess. And then we also look at the MDGs moving towards the SDGs. Okay, so that's inquiry question 1. Is very much development heavy. Focuses on health because it talks about health and life expectancy, not so much about human rights. Okay. Inquiry question 2. It is where we start to talk about human rights for the first time really in the unit. You might remember the first lesson was on the UDHR, which is Universal Declaration of Human Rights. We then look at the ECHR, which is the European Convention on Human Rights, which is linked to the Council of Europe. Very different to the European Council, completely separate to the European Union, despite the fact it's based in Strasbourg and the European Parliament is too. I made a whole video about the difference between that EU and Council of Europe. Okay, same flag, same anthem, basically share a lot in common, but it's a very different institution. And then we had a look at, I think, Geneva Convention, off the top of my head, I think it happened whilst I was on paternity leave. And it's basically looking at what happens in war. And I was using a horrible word in school, in class of, it's a rule of the game. If you're going to play the game of war, it's a horrible one to do. There's some rules you can't break. And we can see that we've got an international criminal court in The Hague. As things stands when I record this video, Putin is under arrest warrant because of war crimes committed. All this happens due to breaches of Geneva Convention, etc. Okay, so I'll get to the case studies in a second. So we very much look at international law and human rights. Second section of human rights varying from place to place. We look at the difference between countries in terms of human rights. So in there we look at the levels, we look at corruption, we look at different types of countries, so democratic versus authoritarian and dictatorships. How does a type of society, type of politics affects the quality of its human rights law? And the final section we look at, it says here, significant variations in human rights within countries. So we look at how human rights might be on the whole good in some place, but not everywhere for everyone. So we think of post-colonial states. I'm thinking top of my head, apartheid South Africa, not very good from a human rights point of view after the end of the colonization. We look at indigenous populations in North and South America. We look at women in Afghanistan. We look at the Aboriginals in Australia. We look at I think it's women in Bolivia. Okay, so you might remember the case studies being here as in UDHR, we look at the Saudi Arabia and Russia. What have they done? That could be criticised. Arguably, the UK is not squeaky clean on that either. There's some breaches of human rights we've done in the UK as a society. If you look, the list is long, and it's hard to judge how clear the break is when it happens. We look at the fact the UK has wanted to leave the European Convention on Human Rights post-Brexit, and the confusion around EU and the Council of Europe. We look at a Geneva Convention, we looked at the Balkan, the Yugoslav War, and we looked at the annexation of Crimea in 2014, which first time Putin stuck his toes in the Ukrainian water. We have a look at corruption in Haiti, the Myanmar military junta. We look at Zimbabwe's failed political state under Robert Mugabe. And then when we look at the differences within countries, we have a look at ethnicity in Rwanda, post-genocide, Hutus and Tutsis. We have a look at Native American Indians. We have a look at women in Afghanistan, gender in Bolivia, Australian immigration. We look at differences in human rights within these countries. That was a homework, if you remember. Same for Zimbabwe, Myanmar, and Haiti. So ultimately, you'll only know one of those depending on which ones you picked for your homework. Okay, there's just a list of the ones you could choose from. Okay, so do go back to that homework. We discussed it in class overall, but the nitty-gritty detail was done in your homework. Okay, inquiry question 3. The same thing, we're still on human rights. Here we're looking at how human rights are used as an argument for a political or military intervention. The first one is we look at different forms of geopolitical interventions in order to defend human rights. We look at development aid. We look at trade embargoes, military aid, direct military action. We looked at the role of NGOs and IGOs. We have a look at the role of some government ideas, some government in the West imposing their views on others. We then have a look at how development is focused on improving both human rights and human welfare, but actually sometimes at the expense of cultural and environmental effects. So we'd have a look at the role of TNCs and improving the quality of life, improving the development of Nigeria, but at the expense of the environment. We have a look at the issues around malaria. We had a look at cholera in Haiti post earthquake, and then the final one we look at military intervention. So in there we have a look. We discuss intervening in other countries, the war on terror post 9/11 terrorist attack in New York. We have a look at whether they were successful, etc. So the case studies for there, your international government organizations are World Trade Organization, the International Monetary Fund, the UNESCO, which is part of the UN, OECD, a club of mostly rich countries. We look at as NGOs, non-government organizations. We look at Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, Oxfam, and Médecins Sans Frontières, which are all charities that help to promote basically development and human rights around the world. In geopolitical intervention, we did a whole lesson on Libya and the fall of Colonel Gaddafi, what happened in the vacuum that followed, or how the UK and the US tried to intervene. In development, when we look at development aid and how it intervenes to tackle diseases, we had a look at Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation for Malaria. We had a look at Haiti and the cholera outbreak. And then when we look at the environment, we discussed Niger Delta and oil, especially Shell in that area. I made a video on Iran COP when it happened in Sharm el Sheikh in Egypt with Peter Viss, who was a head of cabinet for climate change in the European Commission, and he talks to us about to what extent should we allow low-income countries to jeopardize the environment in order to improve development and living standards. So it's kind of an informal chat with my dad, but it allows you, with someone who's worked in the area and worked in the system in some ways, allows you to get a bit of a perspective of it's a complex mix of improving people's welfare whilst protecting the environment. It's not so easy. Okay, so you might find that interesting. There's another YouTube video on that on the playlist. I think it's at the very bottom of my page in the miscellaneous, and it's included obviously in the health and human rights playlist. And then finally, military aid. We have a look at ISIS. We have a look at Russia. We have a look at Guantanamo Bay in the US, just to highlight the fact every country has its own questionable actions. I think we might have looked at Xinjiang and the Uyghur Muslims as well. So yeah, there's some examples you could look at. And the final one is inquiry question 4. There we have a look at the outcome of these interventions in terms of improving development and human rights. So we look at the first inquiry question, we look at development. Second one, we look at human rights. The one after that, we look at an intervention. And the last one is basically summarizing whether successful. So first, we look at how it's improved various countries. The case studies there, we look at measuring success, and we think at the European migration crisis after the Syrian civil war, when loads of migrants came to Europe in search of refuge. How did that work? We look at China and the importance of democracy in promoting development and human rights. We also have a look at Botswana for AIDS and Sierra Leone for Ebola, and how successful or unsuccessful they've been. Botswana is a shining light in African democracy, economy and management, whereas Sierra Leone's really struggled. And then we look at the cost of military intervention. We look at Iraq. We have a look at Mozambique. Not Mozambique, took absolute rubbish. Zimbabwe and Ivory Coast. Okay, so it's basically looking at whether intervening in some or other countries has been successful. So the military interventions is where we look at Iraq, Zimbabwe, and Ivory Coast. That's the final part of inquiry question 4. The middle part is looking at aid. So it's development aid is middle part. End part is military aid, and the top part is how do we actually go about measuring success. Okay. I hope this video helps. Okay, look back through your notes. I promise you we've taught every part of the spec. You know everything there is to know. There were a lot of handouts. There's been lots of holidays in between. You had your mocks in between. It's been quite difficult to keep track of everything because it's such a huge unit. But I think this goes somewhere as to kind of summarizing some of the key things you've learned in this year. Okay.